full and detailed response to that.
We now move to First Minister's questions. Question number 1, Joanne Lamont.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Later today I'll be speaking with Steve First, Regional President of the global electronics manufacturer Plexus, who I'm delighted to announce are creating 130 jobs as part of a £9 million investment in Bathgate, West Lothian. After the disappointment of Vion deciding to close its operations, today's announcement will be very welcome news indeed for the people of West Lothian and an early result for the West Lothian recovery strategy. Presiding Officer, I think it would be also appropriate to pay tribute to John Park, who I understand is shortlisted to stand down as a member of the Scottish Parliament. He's made a very considerable contribution to our proceedings over the years. And in light of everything, we should also congratulate Celtic on their qualification for the European Championship. I think Neil Lennon's on his way to becoming a legend.
Joanne Lamont.
Perhaps the only word I would dispute there is the word becoming, but we can maybe discuss that later. And I welcome the comments, of course, that the First Minister has made about jobs and about the decision of John Park to stand down. I'm sure we all wish him well. We will miss him very much on this side, but we know he will continue with the struggle and the battles and the values he believes in his new job, as well as he's done in the past. Presiding Officer, this week doctors called for honesty from politicians on cancer treatment. Alex Neil has now announced a review of access to new medicines, which I welcome. And of course, under Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland went from the top nation in the UK using innovative drugs to the worst. Can the First Minister explain why Scots don't get access to the latest cancer drugs on the NHS?
First Minister.
Well, the process by which the Scottish Medical Commission looks at these matters is a very robust one. It's been supported across the parties, and I think it would be very unwise to change it. The recent controversy concerns the introduction in the English Health Service of a special cancer drugs fund. That introduction has been opposed in Scotland, not just by the SNP, but by the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, by the Welsh Government as well, basically because it is not, it doesn't fulfil many of the things that are claimed for it. In particular, it does introduce in England a postcode lottery, and secondly, the criticism from the range of charities who submitted to this Parliament points out that they cannot see the reason for having a specific special cancer drug fund when there are other equally serious conditions which don't have such a fund. So I think we should be confident that the SMC process in Scotland is a robust one, and we should continue our all-party support for the integrity of that process.
Joanne Lamont.
I didn't ask the First Minister for a critique of what's happening elsewhere. I asked him about what is his responsibility. He says that process might create a postcode lottery. Is he not aware there's currently a postcode lottery in Scotland? And while there is no test of cost-benefit to my free hay fever tablets, that is applied to cancer drugs. Because let's look at the reality. This morning we spoke to Ian Morrison. He's 56 and suffering from bowel cancer. He has to pay £1,700 a fortnight for the drugs he hopes will prolong his life. And astonishingly, part of that is an administration charge from the NHS to get the drugs they won't give him for free. As patients suffer, doctors despair. Dr Tim Cook told Parliament this week, "As an Englishman looking after patients in Scotland, I think that there is an inequality that, to my mind, as a simple doctor, is unacceptable. In that, I cannot offer my Scottish patients the same medication with which I can treat my English patients. As a human being and a doctor, I do not see how that can be right." Does the First Minister think that is right?
First Minister.
Well, that refers specifically, and I saw the quote and indeed the evidence to the committee, to the introduction in England of the Special Cancer Drugs Fund. The committee also heard from the Scottish Cancer Research Network lead, Dr David Dunlop, which said, equivalent to the Cancer Drugs Fund, which clinicians south of the border say is far from perfect, In fact, that fund brings more postcode prescribing than existed previously, because each of the different strategic health authorities has a different shopping list that is influenced by its clinicians. And that position has previously, incidentally, been supported by the Labour Party in this chamber. We should always look for ways to improve the position. We should always look for ways in which the Scottish Medicines Consortium can be even better in progressing its work. But can I point out that is exactly why Alec Neil, as Health Secretary, has set up the investigation by Professor Routledge, which is looking specifically about how we can improve the situation in Scotland. But I don't think, because it's an extraordinarily difficult area, that it's particularly helpful to make quotations which refer to the existence of a special cancer drugs fund, which we have, thus far, decided in Scotland is not appropriate for the reasons I've given. And we should also hear the evidence from the cancer charities and others supporting the work of the SMC and pointing out the advantages of the processes of the Scottish Medicines Consortium. Now, I think it's a matter which we must consider as a government and as a parliament with the utmost care and utmost sensitivity, because it touches obviously on life-limiting conditions and people in conditions of great extremity. But I do think Joanne Lamont should accept that thus far at least, the SMC process has enjoyed cross-party, robust support in Scotland, and I think we should be very careful about departing from that established process of integrity.
Joanne Lamont.
The First Minister ought to stop accusing me of doing things I'm not doing, and he ought to stop arguing about something that I'm not arguing for. What I'm saying is, I don't need anybody to tell me how serious an issue this is. Nobody in here does. What I'm saying to him is, there's a postcode lottery in Scotland. I've described a particular case, and it is a very serious issue, and the First Minister's response to it seems to be that what we've got is very good. I am not promoting a particular model to solve this. I am asking the First Minister to confront the fact that there is a major problem, because it isn't just those people I've already described. The inequality isn't just between Scotland and England. There is an even greater inequality within Scotland. Dr Nola Rourke of the Beatson Cancer Centre told the Health Committee in this Parliament this week that middle-class, articulate patients are more likely to get the cancer drugs they need than vulnerable patients from deprived backgrounds. Patients in less need, she said, have got treatment denied others in greater clinical need because they were more articulate. Dr O'Rourke described that as inequitable. Does the First Minister agree?
First Minister.
The reason that I made the points I made to Joanne Lamont is the quote she gave was an illustration of the impact of the introduction of the Special Cancer Drugs Fund in England. That is why, I'm looking at the evidence. The argument that there are drugs available in England is because of the Special Cancer Drugs Fund, and they are not available in every part of England, and the committee has heard, and I suspect will hear more evidence of the drawbacks of that particular system. The reason that I point to the robustness of the SMC is not to argue the position we have in Scotland is perfect. If we thought the position was perfect, we wouldn't have set up the Routledge Review in order to see how we can improve the situation. But, for example, the time that the SMC takes to produce guidance following authorisation for drugs is just over 7 months in Scotland. The equivalent time in England is 21 months. So that does indicate, and there's much evidence from the charities and peoples affected of why they appreciate that speed in which the SMC goes about its work. There are important improvements that we have made to the process of individual patient requests. The purpose, among other things, of Professor Routledge's review is to see how we can improve that further. But when Joanne Lamont says she's not proposing a particular solution, I think it would be helpful as we contribute to the debate, and hopefully this is what the Health Committee will do, if people actually would contribute positive suggestions as to how we can improve the situation. But that should be done from the recognition that what we are dealing with, whether it's in Scotland, England, Wales or whatever, is an extremely serious issue. that we're doing our best to deal with it. The SMC is a robust process, and the Routledge Review is there to make further improvements on behalf of the people of Scotland.
John Lamont.
Of course, the doctor referred to wasn't talking about the SMC. He was talking about the individual patient treatment request, which he has conducted a review into. My point is that his review needs to go broader than the remit that's been given to it because of the huge challenges here. And the First Minister says we should have an open and honest debate about this. When I questioned his priorities in health spending, I was accused of wanting to tax the sick, and that debate was quickly closed down. This is all part of the same serious process, because it's not just patients who are getting the latest drugs, because the NHS in Scotland spends only just over half the money on cancer drugs than the European average. Cancer specialists don't want to work here. Dr Richard Casosola told this Parliament, this week that every Scottish cancer centre is at least one specialist short, and that the most gifted doctors don't want to work here because they can't prescribe the latest drugs. We are not able to be the cutting edge because of choices the First Minister has made about the way in which drugs are accessed. Will the First Minister please be honest with cancer patients and specialists, confront the reality that this is the result of choices he has made and about his priorities for spending in the NHS?
First Minister. First Minister.
I think Jan Lamont should accept the substantial efforts and spending, indeed, on cancer research in Scotland. To accept cancer centres, the substantial increase in the outcomes, successful outcomes for cancer that we're seeing, the abidance for the first time, I think, of the target to have 95% of cancer patients seen in a specified period. The figure when Labour were in office was 85%. These are all substantial improvements in the service we're able to offer. When I argue that the SMC has a robust process that we should reflect and be proud of and be very careful about overturning it, I'm not speaking as First Minister. I'm looking, for example, at Melanoma UK, who says the modifiers that the SMC used in their decision-making are applied more pragmatically than the comparable but not identical criteria used by the National Institute. That's a nice experience. They say they prefer the SMC approach to what happens south of the border. So there is a substantial support from many people that the SMC process is robust. There is much evidence that the individual patient request process, which applies to drugs which have not been authorised by the SMC, has factors in it which could be improved. That's why the Health Secretary set up Professor Routledge's review to see if we could improve the situation further. But I think Joanne Lamont should be very careful about suggesting that cancer treatment in Scotland is not improving because it is. She shouldn't say that there isn't a commitment to research in cancer, because there most certainly is.
Order. Order.
Well, £6 million on 24 cancer research projects by the Chief Scientist's Office. And also she should accept that we are dealing with a hugely difficult circumstance, and how to successfully approve and make available to the people of Scotland new experimental drugs which come on and become available, to find a safe process for authorising these, and to find the best possible way of making them available to the community of Scotland. But every single person in this chamber is committed to better outcomes for cancer patients in Scotland. And let's go forward to find that better solution, supporting the Routledge Review in an atmosphere which accepts that, in essence, this cannot be seen as a party political matter, but a matter of trying to improve the health and welfare of the people of Scotland.
Question number 2, Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister when he will next meet the Prime Minister.
First Minister.
No plans near future.
Ruth Davidson.
Presiding Officer, there has been one party in this chamber that has consistently argued for a Scottish Cancer Drugs Fund. And the First Minister is right. that argument put forward by the Scottish Conservatives has been consistently opposed by the SNP and by the Labour Party. Today, the First Minister says it's because it's an imperfect solution. Well, First Minister, it may not be perfect, but a cancer drugs fund is a solution to Scottish cancer patients getting better treatment, to them getting access to the same drugs as people elsewhere, and to difficulties in recruiting cancer specialists north of the border. I've raised that with this First Minister. My predecessor has raised it with this First Minister. And the postcode issues that he cites today have been being addressed down south since the Drugs Fund's inception. Can I ask this First Minister, does he even know which drugs are being routinely denied Scottish patients, which are now available in England?
First Minister.
I've seen a number of drugs cited which are available via the Cancer Drugs Fund in England, which are not available except through individual patient requests if successful in Scotland. Equally, the process of SMC authorisation of medicines means there's a range of drugs in Scotland that are available for a range of conditions which are not currently available in England. I can list some of these if Ruth Davidson would like. But, can we probably conduct a debate on trying to get the best possible system for the people of Scotland, and to argue that, as Ruth Davidson seems to say, that the Cancer Drugs Fund, which introduced in England, is the best solution, I think does tend to ignore the substantial evidence of the difficulties, drawbacks and inequities of that position in England, and of course the evidence that came to this chamber from a range of charities when they submitted to the Parliament saying that is not the road they wanted to go down. So the suggestion that the Cancer Drugs Fund is the solution, I don't think is met by the evidence. The willingness of this government to look for a better position that we have in Scotland is symbolised by the setting up by the Health Secretary of the Routledge Review. If we weren't interested in fighting better outcomes for Scottish patients, we wouldn't have set up Professor Routledge's review.
Ruth Davidson.
Well, First Minister, I have information here which I'm happy to lodge in Spice that shows that between October 2010 and the 27th of November of this year, more than 23,000 cancer patients in England have had their lives extended by the Cancer Drugs Fund. That's 23,000 families able to spend more time with their loved one who did think that this was a road that was worth going down. And because of this fund, patients in England have had access to everolimus to tackle kidney cancer. That's a drug not routinely available in Scotland. Avastin for kidney cancer. Lapatinib and eribulin available for those with breast cancer, drugs not routinely available in Scotland. And bendamustine for those suffering from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and chronic leukemia, not routinely available in Scotland. This government has failed those Scottish patients who have died of these conditions but could have had more time with access to these drugs. It doesn't have to fail thousands more. Rich people don't need free prescriptions. Cancer patients need better treatment. Will the First Minister, in his review, at least reconsider his opposition to a cancer drugs fund?
First Minister.
The view is there, as previously been discussed, to look at all areas which could improve the situation in Scotland. But Ruth Davidson should at least acknowledge that not only are there substantial criticism of the Cancer Drugs Fund, not least from cancer charities themselves, and from Conservative members of Parliament, but the Cancer Drugs Fund is in itself a temporary fund before value-based pricing is due to be introduced. And, in acknowledging that different systems produce different outcomes, there are a range of drugs, which I could cite to Ruth Davidson, available for a range of conditions in Scotland through the SMC process, which are not available through NICE. We tried to find the best possible system for Scottish patients. Generally speaking, the SMC process is well regarded across this chamber, I hope, and by the medical profession and by the patients of Scotland. It's a system we can have confidence in. The Routledge Review is designed to look at particular improvements that can be made, whether it be in the SMC process or whether it be in terms of the individual patient requests. But there is a huge willingness on the part of this government to look for better outcomes for the people of Scotland. But there is also a track record which indicates that cancer patients in Scotland are receiving better and earlier treatment than they've ever had before. And in terms of the move in prevention and early detection of cancer, there have been very, very substantial advances. So let us proceed on this subject with the understanding that every single member of this Parliament and every single party is trying to get better outcomes for the patients of Scotland, and our National Health Service in Scotland has certain advantages over models which might be pursued elsewhere.
I have a number of backbenchers who wish to ask questions. I'm determined that we're going to do so. So could the questions be brief and could the answers be brief too? Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of the outcome of the ballot of RMT members serving on the Orkney and Shetland Ferry service, and that the islands now face the real threat of industrial action over the Christmas holiday period. When my colleague Tavish Scott raised this with the First Minister last month, he rightly highlighted the potentially devastating impact any strike action affecting these lifeline services would have on the islands. In light of that, can I urge the First Minister to take whatever steps he can to ensure that the strike does not happen, so that the people in Orkney and Shetland can look forward to a Christmas without the threat of disruption to this genuine lifeline?
First Minister.
The Scottish Government is aware and concerned about the situation. We are hoping that all involved will recognise the importance of talks and coming to a satisfactory conclusion to minimise the likelihood and impact of disruption on a lifeline service.
Bruce Crawford.
Does the First Minister share my deep concern at the announcement this morning by Remploy in a company statement that 3 Remploy businesses are not commercially viable or have any realistic prospect of being sold as going concern? And these include Stirling, Dundee and Clydebank, and they are now to be closed. Does he agree with me also that the workers in these factories have been badly let down by the UK Government in the way they have been treated in this matter?
First Minister.
I think the attitude to Remploy speaks very poorly of the attitude of the UK Government to workers in that position. I feel particularly for the workers in those factories who were given an indication that there could be a successful outcome to the change of process, and that hasn't as yet come to pass. As I've said before in this chamber, Fergus Ewing, the Minister, is working very closely with individual constituency members to try and find a satisfactory outcome. And I think that work should be, again, supported across the parties in this chamber.
Bruce Smith.
I'm grateful, Presiding Officer. I've been contacted by a couple this morning who are concerned that they may have been affected by the problems at the Glasgow Assisted Conception Unit, and they have not yet been contacted by the Health Board. Does the First Minister agree with me that no women or couples should have their chance at a family reduced by this situation, and that, if necessary, some may need to begin their treatment again? Will he also ask the Health Secretary to look at the resources available to the Board to ensure that the result is not even longer waits for women and couples who are still at the back of the queue for treatment?
First Minister.
Yeah, I'll look into why the constituents of the member haven't been contacted by the Health Board to say what the way forward is going to be, and shall make arrangements for the Health Secretary to contact the member directly.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister what impact the autumn budget statement will have on Scotland.
First Minister.
Well, 2 aspects in particular. Once again, it's quite clear on, I suspect from the statement yesterday, but certainly from analysis of the figures, that the poorest in society are to bear the brunt of the prolonged austerity that the Chancellor is now indicating. The analysis, this is the Treasury's own analysis, indicates that the poorest households will be £200 worse off next year as a combined result of the tax and benefit measures that were outlined in the autumn statement. I should also say that the autumn statement contained an increase in capital spending. That's a measure for which the Scottish Government has campaigned over these last 2 years. There will be about £330 million net in consequentials. It should be remembered, however, across this chamber, that will just undo some of the position of the previous cuts. The capital budget net will still be going down by 26%. I think that indicates, and perhaps the Chancellor's change of heart in capital spending is in itself an admission that the previous strategy clearly was not working, the economy was flatlining, but his tendency to punish those least able to protect themselves is in itself an indictment of the Chancellor's approach.
Patrick Harvey.
The failure of the UK Government's programme of economic bloodletting is clear for all to see, but instead of changing track, the Chancellor does indeed take billions more from the pockets of the poorest forcing them to fund yet another massive tax cut for big business. In that context, isn't it time for the Scottish Government to give up on the dream of even deeper corporate tax cuts and accept that corporation tax is a necessary tool for raising the investment we need in a fairer society and a healthier economy?
First Minister.
I think we should plan our tax policies to increase the wealth in the community and the economy, and having a competitive economy is part of that. We should also plan our tax and distribution policies to bring out an equitable distribution of that wealth. But I don't accept, and I'm sure Patrick Harvey will never put forward the argument, that an increase of wealth necessarily means unfairness in distribution. Actually, I think the most successful economies in the world are economies which have an equitable distribution of wealth as well as the ability to create that wealth. I think one of the reasons an independent Scotland will be so successful is that we shall be a just nation.
Question number 4, Jim Eadie.
Ask the First Minister what steps the Scottish...
Can we get Mr Eadie's mic on, please?
Ask the First Minister what steps the Scottish Government is taking to ensure that the transport network is prepared for winter.
First Minister.
All I heard from the first question was what steps the Scottish Government were taking, and I thought this was going to be an extremely long answer indeed, but we can't control the weather, and transport disruption can never be ruled out, but there's been a great deal of proactive planning. For Trunk Road, additional gritters patrolling the busiest trunk road, increased stocks of salt, alternative de-icers, 2 new ice-breaking vehicles, increased technology to get information to people, real-time information on the move, the completion of a £2.2 million programme of investment to improve the resilience of the railway network to adverse weather, the investment of £1 million in an ice-buster train that can quickly thaw out junctions and other key equipment, the completion of a programme of points heater upgrades by Network Rail, significant investment by Scotland's airports, including new equipment with walkaway sweepers, a new snowblower, de-icing equipment, increased snow team numbers at Edinburgh Airport, all of which means that the weather can't be controlled, but the member can be reassured that the resilience and preparation of the Scottish Government and our partners is very good indeed.
Jim Eadie.
I accept that the First Minister does not control the weather, but will he endeavour to ensure that all relevant departments and agencies work together so that this vital work is both prioritised and funded for the safety of all people who travel by foot or by bike this winter? Because in my constituency, many of my constituents use the Edinburgh Intertube map and travel to work and to school by bicycle and by foot. So as well as keeping our vital roads and motorways open and safe, we must do all that we can for all of our people who travel by foot or bike.
First Minister.
Well, Transport Scotland, as Jimmy knows, treats a number of key footways on the Trunk Road network. They're working with communities who are keen to play their part to help keep their own footpaths free of snow and ice. They're also providing footway self-help kits to communities adjacent to the Trunk Road, not to replace the service made by the operating companies, or in the case of local authority roads by the local authorities, but allowing people to play a fuller part in contributing if they're able to do so.
I'm going to take question number 6 now from Mary Scanlon.
Officer, to ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government will take following the recent Supreme Court ruling relating to the Mental Health Care and Treatment Scotland Act 2003.
First Minister.
As the member is well aware, this case arises from the provisions of the 2003 Act and arrangements which have existed since that Act came into force. Mary Scanlon also knows that arrangements were in place in respect of security arrangements in forensic care facilities out with the State Hospital were found by the Mental Welfare Commission to be appropriate in the visits in 2009 and 2010, and the Scottish courts interpreting Scottish legislation agreed with the Government's position and found there was no requirement to make regulations. It was on that basis that the appeal was contested in the Supreme Court. It should be noted the case turned on a technical issue of statutory interpretation. We are currently considering the terms and implications of the judgment to decide on the most appropriate course of action in responding to the ruling.
Mary Scanlon.
Notwithstanding further interpretations, can I just say that the Supreme Court judgment relates to 2 amendments in my name, which were passed unanimously by this Parliament in March 2003. And given that the Supreme Court has now found that ministers have acted unlawfully by failing to implement regulations to ensure mental health patients receive the level of security appropriate to their needs, can the First Minister now give Parliament an indication of how many potential compensation claims for victims are expected as a result of the Government's failure to comply with its own laws?
No, it's not possible to do that at the present moment. Just say two things to Mary Scanlon. I mean, I know the background. I know the amendment was on the 20th of March 2003. I know that she proposed it. I know that Shona Robinson seconded it. We have the full background. I think Mary Scanlon should accept that the importance in looking at what's in the interest and welfare and natural justice of the people involved, that the Mental Welfare Commission considered in 2009 and 10 the arrangements were appropriate. That's a very important point, which perhaps wasn't the case when Mary Scanlon was extremely concerned about the issue back in 2003. So it's not possible to consider the full implications of the court judgment. The Government is currently considering the terms and implications of the judgment and deciding, therefore, on the most appropriate course of action.
I'm now going to take question number 5, Richard Simpson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the maximum time is that a patient has waited beyond the standard cancer waiting time target in 2012.
First Minister.
Well, as Richard Simpson is aware, we have two targets for cancer treatment. The 62-day target, which is measured from a point the patient is referred to a specialist, and a 31-day target for treatment to begin once a course of action has been agreed with the patient and the specialist. In the second quarter of 2012, there were 2,975 patients seen within the 62-day limit, which represents 95.3% of those referred for treatment. Now, even that's a good performance. It's the first time these targets have been met over the last couple of years. There are individuals, however, for whom this target was not met. The maximum wait for one patient was 399 days, which is totally unacceptable. But I'm sure Richard Simpson will reflect that the vast majority of patients now in Scotland are treated within the target date time.
This could be brief, Dr Simpson.
Can I thank the First Minister for his reply? Yesterday, the whole Parliament joined in acknowledging the achievements of the National Health Service staff in reducing waiting times. But is he aware that annually there are now 600 Scots not being treated for cancer within the 62-day target? The Government's early detection cancer programme is very welcome, but 1/3 of those who breach for the subsequent treatment are colorectal cancer patients. So will the First Minister undertake to get the Health Department to investigate, track and research these patients to see where these problems lie, which could be resolved by making more of the hard choices that Joanne Lamont has referred to today?
First Minister.
Well, I'll certainly take a look, and the Health Secretary will reply specifically to Richard Simpson's information on that aspect and advice given his specialism in the subject. The 95.3% figure, we aspire for that to be 100%. But I'll know that Richard Simpson will reflect that the reason we're at 95.3%, as opposed to the 85% that we inherited when we took office, with the huge number of patients that means who are being seen within the timescale, is a result of the hard choices that this government took to protect the revenue budget of the National Health Service, which is my clear memory, which no doubt will be confirmed by the leader of the Labour Party sitting alongside him, was not the position of the Labour Party in the election, or in the election campaign, or wasn't confirmed by the Labour Party leader. So the hard choice that we took to protect the revenue budget of the National Health Service has been a substantial addition in terms of providing a successful outcome for many people. I accept totally we should aspire to 100%, but we should reflect on the fact our National Health Service is now achieved that 95% target, and we all should aspire to do more.